When you pick a player in the first round, that player is important. So when you make a player important, that means you should probably play them. Because the opposite of important is unimportant. Somebody, for example, that is unimportant is Andy Dalton. He not drafted. No, he inconsistent. So what you do is you pick to be in the fourth round, and when you pick somebody in the fourth round, that probably meant you wanted to play them.
I apologize if you guys don't understand what it is that I'm doing. You see, if Andy actually listens to this, which I doubt that he does, but I would like to believe that somewhere in this cold world that Andy does listen to this, I'm going to accommodate to him because I'm a good guy. So what I'm doing right now is I'm translating in Titiri language, and I'm instructing Andy what he should do from this point on, because it's obvious that plain English, it's not getting through to him.
So when you pick somebody in the fourth round, you should always make them a priority, because when you pick somebody that high, that means they were a good player, and if somebody a good player, that means they opposite of bad, and you want good, because you want to win championship, right? You want to win championship. So you pick a good player and you put them in the fourth, and you not put them on the bench. You not do that, because that is bad, and the opposite of bad is good.
I think that's good enough. I think maybe moving forward, Andy should pretty much get the point, though I doubt it. You see, because Andy managed to make things worse for himself. Andy went up against J-Ray, okay? And as I said last week, I predicted that Andy would probably do this again. Indeed, he did do it again. And if we take a look at the papers, we'll notice that Andy Dalton on the Thursday night game against the Cleveland Browns scored 21 points. We're so excited for Andy Dalton. You see, but the problem here is, and the commish, again, can attest to this, the problem here is, and I acknowledge this, Thursday night is 21 points something that Drew Brees can't do? Now, I understand that Andy didn't know going in that Andy Dalton would score 21 points, and that that's something that Drew Brees is totally capable of. He's obviously optimistic that Andy Dalton will score 50 points. But the point is when you've set the metrics up the way that you've set them up, and I'm going to sound like a broken record again, considering that this is a player who at this point in the season, if you take a look at the rankings, is outranking Andy Dalton just by one position. But if we want to go by rankings, Drew Brees is the third ranked quarterback and Andy Dalton is the fourth. Now, all this time, I'm not looking over the fact that Andy Dalton is having a good season. I understand that Andy Dalton is having a good season. But 21 points is what he scored week 9. He scored 21 on another affair week 6. He had 26 week 5. And then when you scroll up to week 3, he scored 30. You'll excuse me, it's a bit late at night. He scored 30. Again, there's nothing on his stat sheet that if you remove the name Andy Dalton from it and you put Drew Brees in there, you wouldn't be surprised. Now, just to, I guess give you a bit of an example of what I'm trying to say here, would you be surprised if Drew Brees' numbers went from week 1, 27, week 2, 28, week 3, 22, bye, week 5, 25, week 6, 22, Week 7, 29. Week 8, 30. Week 9, 17. You see, that wouldn't have surprised you if it was Drew Brees 4 years ago, but it would surprise you if it was Drew Brees now. That's because these numbers are coming from the number 1 ranked quarterback, Tom Brady. You see, there's a difference there. But when you take a look at Andy Dalton's numbers, you'll notice that there's nothing extraordinary happening here. There's nothing out of the ordinary that's happening with Andy Dalton. He's got pretty good receivers, and that offensive line is clicking, and he's the beneficiary of this good system. But the great players can create. They can create even when they're not in their prime, when they don't have the tools that they once had. And that's what Drew Brees is. Drew Brees is a fucking juggernaut. 505 yards week 8, 387 along with 3 touchdowns week 9. Andy just lost another game for dropping Drew Brees into the bench. So that puts him at 2 losses and 58 points. I'm not making this stuff up here, folks. I'm just not talking to you for the sake of talking to you. And of course, it makes my teeth whiter when I can come back on the mic and I can prove to you that I am amazing and that I am absolutely right. But it pains me at the same time that I have to talk down to somebody who I consider a friend. Sure, I don't see Andy as much as I'd like to, but, you know, I like you, Andy. You know, you got a lot of spunk. You're a good kid. So, in closing this little segment, I just want to, sort of like as a dog whistle, because that's pretty much what this whole TTD language is, because I'd like to think that none of you are as retarded as Andy. But if some of you are, maybe you'll, find some quality in what I'm about to say.
Again, Andy, when you want to pick a player and you pick them in the 4th round, that means that player good. That player real good. A player that bad, for example, that you wouldn't pick in the 4th round would be Blake Bortles. You don't want Blake Bortles. You want Drew Brees. Drew Brees is good. And like I told you in the past, good is the opposite of bad. There you go. And you don't want bad. No, Andy. You want good.
Moving on. Moving on to another item. Another individual. Another fantasy owner. Ed. Ed is now the number 1 ranked team in fantasy, with a whopping record of 6-3. Ed has managed to score 929 points after 9 weeks of fantasy play. Okay, so what does Ed decide to do with this newfound success? Well, I'll tell you what Ed didn't do weeks before this. Is Ed didn't get behind the camera and start boasting. That's what he didn't do. He certainly didn't do that in week 4 when he lost to me 63-92. He certainly didn't do that when he was behind in the rankings just a couple of weeks ago. But now that he's jumped ahead of me by 10 points, oh yes, by 10 points, Ed is sticking his chest out. Now, Ed doesn't realize this, but what Ed is revealing here is that he, once again, deserves exactly what he's always gotten out of fantasy. And the reason why I say that is because Ed has always provided us with the sort of entertainment that I would say is comparable to a terrible movie, but the special kind of terrible movie that doesn't know that it's terrible and has all the ambitions of an Oscar award-winning movie, but one that fails scene after scene, line after line, and it just provides you with terrible, good movie fucking excellency. Or excellence, I'm not sure. But you understand. The type of movie that you watch at 3 o'clock in the morning and everybody's fucking serious. Maybe you saw it on Cinemax when you were younger and you laugh at every fucking line because it's delivered so cheesily. That's what Ed's fantasy moves are like. You guys can all remember that classic fantasy year when Rob Baronis was all the rave and Ed picked Rob Baronis. And then after that, he drafted another kicker because it's so necessary to have two kickers. And Ed obviously doesn't pay too much attention to history because he got no success out of drafting two kickers, but somehow he thinks that he could get a lot of success by hoarding an extra kicker because it's not enough to have Steven Gostowski. No, I've got to have Matt Prater on my bench just in case civilization as we know it collapses and all the great kickers are taken. He's got to be sitting on my bench. So Ed provides us with this kind of cringe-worthy entertainment. But once again, he proves to us that he deserves exactly what he's going to get. What does Ed feel like he deserves? Well, Ed feels like he deserves a temporary lead in the standings 3 quarters into the season with a 10-point separation between him and I. Now, of course, I'm speaking to you knowing that I talk more shit here than anyone else. Well, that's because in fantasy, you have to decide whether you're going to be a fucking tortoise or a hare. Okay? Most of you guys are tortoises. You know, you pick your fantasy teams, you make your moves, you do everything that you have to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? I'm a fucking hare. Okay? I would even say that Andy's a hare because Andy, though he doesn't participate too much, any interaction that you get from Andy is a boastful fucking reaction, which is great. Andy's a hare. And I really think that Eric's also a hare as well, though he doesn't comment as much as he used to. And J Ray's sort of an in-betweener. So that's why this is supposed to go for you, just like it went for J Ray just several weeks ago. You got to decide whether you're going to be a tortoise or a hare. You can't be in the middle. You can't be in the middle. Because when you're talking trash in fantasy, the beauty of it all, the poetic justice is in you looking like a fucking idiot after you talked all that shit. Now, me being the hare that I am, I don't give a shit. You see, because this little thing here behind this motherfucking microphone, this started like week 4 when I was either fucking 500 or below 500. You see, because it does not matter to Bundy. Whether he's on top or whether he isn't, he's going to talk his shit. Okay? Now, you've decided that you're a tortoise because you didn't fucking say shit when I stuck my dick in your ass. You didn't say anything beforehand. You didn't say a goddamn word, but I can only assume that had you had your way with me, you would have gotten behind that fucking camera and you would have just been all the rave. You just would have been the shit. See, it's very easy after the fact, after you feel like you've gotten to a certain benchmark, to just jump out and tell everybody, oh, hey, yeah, I did it. But it's corny. That's why you have to do it beforehand. That's a point in fantasy. That's the risk that you take. Okay? In fantasy, that's the risk that you take. You say stuff beforehand, and if it doesn't come through, then you eat crow. You look like a fucking dick. I've looked like a dick thousands of times, but I'll tell you what. I've also raped some people along the way. And I've got 2 championships under this motherfucking belt. And I'll tell you what you don't have. If I'm not mistaken, I don't even remember you having a playoff win. Maybe you got a playoff win your last year here. I'm not sure. But there's something very wrong about your frame of thinking in that video, Ed, and this is it. It's the fact that you think somehow that the fact that people don't score a lot of points against you is a credit to you. Now, don't get me wrong. Maybe the commish, who's much more knowledgeable about the papers in this regard, might be able to tell me that, say, if somebody ties and they have the same record, if they tie with the same amount of points, maybe it might result that the points that you haven't given up is the tiebreaker out of both of those categories, out of the record and out of points scored. Maybe points allowed is how do you determine that? But that's not the way you were approaching it. The way you were approaching it was as if you somehow, I'm going to demonstrate something here, Ed. I mean, you guys can't see me, but I'm sort of like, I'm guarding. I'm sort of like Dikembe Mutombo with like my limbs out, and I'm just like fucking like playing defense. Ed somehow thinks that he is like digitally blocking points, just swatting them away and preventing his opponents from scoring. Because he thinks that that's somehow tied into his fantasy knowledge or his fantasy ability. Now, what it does say, Ed, is that when teams face you, they haven't scored that much. Now, of course, you could say that this is fortunate. This is fantasy chance, and you've just been fortunate that people just don't really score a lot of points. But what it really just says is that motherfuckers don't show up against you, dog. Pretty easy to get those victories in there when people aren't scoring as many points. Now, if you want to approach it from, the standpoint of people don't score against me or whatever, okay, that's fine. You've given up 722 points. Let's get into your little universe. You've given up 722 points. Okay, after that is Pedro. Pedro's given up 741. Okay, that's it. Done. That's all? That's the big gap between you? That's just a little bit larger than the gaps in the point total that you've got on me. You got to decide whether you're going to be a tortoise or a hare, my friend. You can't be both. You have to pick a side. Is this you deciding that you're going to be a hare from now on, and if you lose 3 fucking straight games? Of course, now that I'm saying this, I'm forcing your fucking hand. I'm forcing your hand because you're coming out there with Bundy now. And when you're coming out there in the open with Bundy, you got to fucking come correct. Until then, you've got to decide. You're either a fucking tortoise or a hare. From this point on, you better be a fucking hare. Regardless if you lose 3 or 4 fucking straight games, you better fucking come back and you better talk that shit. You understand me? Fucking understand me?
See, Andy, what I just finna doing right now is I finna telling Ed that he's not good. Because good is the opposite of bad. Andy, you getting good. You getting good.
Okay. The commish lost. I'm not going to make this too long because I didn't watch the games. Okay, correction. I didn't watch the Monday night game. The commish lost, and the way I remember it to be, I thought it was a pretty easy victory on his part because Pedro had a very small lead on him to begin the Monday night games, but Malcolm Floyd was injured. Robbie Gould did nothing, literally nothing. He got 0 points, and Pedro ended up getting the victory, if I'm not mistaken, by about 2 points. So what I see here is karma. I see a karmic reaction. Because you see, I can remember a time last year when the commish obviously got by, and yes, he knows what I'm about to say because I told him this 1,000 times. When the commish got by through all those fantasy waiver blunders where the commish had like one of the worst records in the league, and as the weeks progressed, he got better for the simple fact that he would be, say, ranked 3rd, and ahead of him was Joe and Hensel. Fantasy fucking zombies. So you might as well just consider him to be at the top of the waiver fucking list. Because those guys don't fucking pick. I mean, obviously, that means Orlando didn't literally have the worst record. The worst records were always shared between Hensel and and Joe, they just never made any fucking selections. So not that that's the commission's fault, but he benefited off of that, of course. And now you go to last week when Hensel wasn't looking at his motherfucking team because he's losing the custody battle. He basically gave him a victory. So this is just karma, because although that was a very bizarre loss, I didn't even have to watch the games to understand just how unlikely it was that Dro won that game. And of course, since this is about karma, it's going to come back full circle to Dro, because he gets lucky victories like this all the time. It happens to Dro too, so it just ends up biting him in the ass. But I think it bit you in the ass since you haven't won a championship since the Bush administration, Dro. It's been a while. And there's always going to be an asterisk next to that victory. Moving on to my Week 10 predictions. Last week for Week 9, I was 2-2. So in the season, that puts me at 11-15. Will I ever go over 500? I don't fucking know. These fucking picks are difficult as fucking hell. These are the most challenging issues in my life right now, and I don't know how to deal. So my picks for Week 10 are as follows. Just give me a second here. You guys have to forgive me. It's late, and yeah, it's late. Okay, so my picks are: give me Ed over the commish. Give me Andy over Joe. Give me Jay over Dro. And in the race for last place, the saddest matchup we've witnessed in years, give me Eric over Paul, because I refuse to pick Paul as a victor. It's just not gonna fucking happen.
You see, Andy, a victor isn't just a name. A victor is a noun for a winner. Is what it is. A noun is a person, place, or thing. Alright? Thing. And that's good. And you know what the opposite of good is good. No, Andy, I just joking. It's the opposite of bad. It's the opposite of good. Andy.
Go fuck yourselves.